Yes, and that is utterly insane. So you literally have tens of thousands of people in Arizona who are on the federal only registration list, that these are the people, as you say, they're the ones who could not prove or did not prove that they were citizens, and they get a ballot to be able to vote for president. I mean, that is insanity.
Keeping our republic is on the line, and it requires patriots with great passion, dedication, and eternal vigilance to preserve our freedoms. Jenny Beth Martin is the co-founder of Tea Party Patriots. She is an author, a filmmaker, and one of Time Magazine's most influential people in the world. But the title she is most proud of is mom to her boy-girl twins. She has been at the forefront, fighting to protect America's core principles for more than a decade. Welcome to the Jenny Beth Show.
Today we're joined by my good friend, my mentor, and a wonderful conservative activist, Cleta Mitchell, who is the founder and chairman of the Election Integrity Network. And we're going to be talking about the SAVE Act and other things that Cleta has been working on related to election integrity. Cleta, thanks so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me, Jenny Beth. Always a pleasure to see you and be with you.
So as this interview airs, we will be on the road doing the bus tour for the Only Citizens Vote bus tour, and we are working to get the SAVE Act attached to must-pass legislation. And let's talk a little bit about what the SAVE Act is, any changes we may want to see as we're working to try to get it passed into law, and why it's so important. So why don't you take those 3 points and have at it?
Well, there is a very real need in our country to ensure that the law that prohibits non-citizens from voting is actually a criminal offense under the United States Code for a non-citizen to register or to vote in a federal election. And unfortunately, the National Voter Registration Act that was passed, if you can believe this, 1993, we know it as motor voter. That's the law, the federal law that requires that when you go to the DMV, the Department of Motor Vehicles, some states call it the Driver Services. I think in Georgia, it's the DDS, Department of Driver Services. So, but whatever is the state agency that is responsible for issuing driver's licenses, car registrations, all of those things, that when a person goes to the driver's agency, the driver's license agency, and applies for a driver's license, that application is also deemed under federal law to be an application to register to vote. Well, unfortunately, what has happened in the 30 plus years since the NVRA or motor voter was enacted by Congress, what has happened is that we've seen a complete breakdown, particularly under the Biden administration, in our immigration laws. And I don't think that it could have been envisioned in 1993 that we would have a situation where you literally had millions and millions of illegals coming into our country and then going to the departments of motor vehicles and getting a driver's license or an ID card. And you have to remember that every state issues driver's licenses to non-citizens, and 19 states and the District of Columbia issue driver's licenses to people who are in the United States illegally. And so when they go and apply to get a driver's license, that driver's license application is deemed under federal law to be an application to register to vote, which is illegal under the federal law. So you have this conflict of laws that exists already. And the Motor Voter, National Voter Registration Act, NVRA, whatever you want to call it, it also requires that states must accept and use an application to register to vote that is published it's adopted and issued by the Election Assistance Commission. And on that form, it says, are you a citizen? And it's just the honor system. You check a box, yes or no. Well, the problem is that there's no proof required. And one of the things that's happening, we've seen it happening all over the country, is that there's nobody checking the citizenship. There's nobody verifying that the person who is applying for a driver's license, getting a driver's license or an ID card, if they don't want a driver's license, but getting an ID card, that those people are being registered to vote when they're not citizens. And that's been happening all over the country. And there was a court case that ended up going to the United States Supreme Court in 2013 from Arizona. Bless Arizona's heart. They have been trying to ensure that only citizens are on their voter rolls. They've been working on that since 2002 and still have a problem with it. And what they ended up, they asked the Election Assistance Commission, the state of Arizona asked if they could add to the application that the Election Assistance Commission issued, could they add a requirement that proof of citizenship be provided when registering to vote. And the Supreme Court ruled that only the EAC, the Election Assistance Commission, only the EAC could make that change. They could not issue state-specific instructions. Whatever instructions were issued had to be for every state, unless the state petitioned separately and provided all this information and proof that they needed this state-specific information. Of course, no state has ever done that. So the SAVE Act, the SAVE Act was to basically overturn that Supreme Court decision, to amend the National Voter Registration Act, to remove the restriction, and to actually require that if you're registering to vote, you have to provide your documentary proof that you are a citizen, and you cannot be registered to vote without providing that documentary proof. And so that is essentially what's in the SAVE Act. It has now passed the U.S. House twice, but of course has not been heard in the Senate. And the House, it's crazy. If you can believe this, the Democrats voted almost unanimously against the SAVE Act. And their argument at first was, well, it's already illegal for non-citizens to register and vote. Well, yeah, it's also illegal to come across the U.S. border without coming here in the way required by law. So, that just seemed, that argument didn't go very far. But then they had the second argument they came up with was that, well, if a woman changed her name from when she got married or whatever, that she wouldn't be able to register to vote because her birth certificate name would be different. And I find that the most bizarre, laughable argument. But I decided maybe it's because most of the women that these Democrat leaders know don't change their names when they get married. And so they don't know that you go through a process and you get all your records are all updated, and you actually then do have documentation of your name, and you can go and change it. And that is not a big deal for millions of women every year. So, but that's what the SAVE Act would do, is it would require that in order to register to vote, you would have to provide proof of citizenship.
That argument about the name is so just, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's kind of silly. As women who do change your name, you need your birth certificate, you need your marriage certificate, and then your driver's license normally has your new name on it. So if you just show all of that, they understand that you are who you say you are and that you were born here in America. Or you send that information to get a passport and you could show the passport. So it's a silly argument, and women have to deal with this all the time. And if they get divorced and change their name back, they have to have more documentation. Right. But we're used to it. That's what we do, is we take on our husband's names. So it's something to scare women, but the fact is still, even with all their scare tactics, over 80% of Americans want proof of citizenship to register to vote.
Yes. It's really interesting to me because the left-wing media always says that America is so divided. I figured out, no, we're not divided. There are a lot of 80-20 or 85-15 or 90-10 issues. It's just that that small group, the 10 or the 15 or the 20% happen to be the media in New York and Washington and LA and the Democrat leaders of the Democrat Party. I hate to say it, but that's the divide. It's not the American people. You're right, Jenny Beth. I mean, you've done the polling for Tea Party Patriots over and over, and we've seen all kinds of polling that the vast majority of the American people, Democrats included, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, all believe that you should have to prove you're a citizen before you can register to vote.
It's just pretty simple, and Americans agree on it, and it's something we need to get passed into law. I'd like to go back for just a second to that Supreme Court case regarding Arizona, when Arizona was not just working to get the form change for the federal level, but they were doing this because they require proof of citizenship to vote in their state and local elections. So you have to be a citizen to vote for governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, your representative, your state house, or your state Senate representative. Right. You still have to be a citizen. So what the Supreme Court ruling wound up doing in Arizona was creating two different voter rolls, essentially. So if you prove your citizenship, you can vote in everything, all the way up and down the ballot, from president all the way down to school board or dog catcher or whatever their lowest elected official is. But if you don't provide proof of citizenship, then you get what is called the federal only ballot. So if you don't provide proof of citizenship, you still can vote for president, United States senators, and Congress. And when I heard that, my mind was just blown at how ridiculous this is. So if you don't provide proof of citizenship, you can still affect the Electoral College and who controls the House and Senate.
Yes, and that is utterly insane. So you literally have tens of thousands of people in Arizona who are on the federal only registration list, that these are the people, as you say, they're the ones who could not prove or did not prove that they were citizens, and they get a ballot to be able to vote for president. I mean, that is insanity. And so we really do need to change this federal statute. But one thing that I think is important that is often overlooked is that there is a footnote in that case. And it provides that just because you can't ask the applicant to provide the proof of the documentary proof of citizenship doesn't mean that the driver's license agency or the election officials cannot themselves take it upon themselves to go and look at other data that is available from a state or federal agency to determine if that person is a citizen before adding them to the rolls. But what we've seen, and now, one of the interesting things that has happened is in 2005, Congress passed the Real ID Act. So, and as of May of this year, it finally took effect. They kept postponing the effective date. And so in order to get a real ID, you have to prove that you are either a citizen or that you are here legally. And so that's a very interesting juxtaposition for those 19 states that allow illegals to get driver's licenses. They can't, if you're here illegally, you are not supposed to be eligible to get a real ID. But what I've realized over the last year as we've been working on this is that the departments of motor vehicles actually do have a database of citizens and who is and isn't a citizen, because they had to they required that documentation in order to issue a real ID. Now, it's not 100% foolproof, because I know people who won't go get a real ID. They just use their passports to board airplanes or to enter a federal building. And that law allows them to do that. But most people, over half of the public, I think about 56%, it's not, like I say, it's not dominant over time. Maybe it will be, but only about 56% of Americans who get driver's licenses have provided the proof to be able to obtain a real ID. So it's a place to start. It's not foolproof. And that actually is why I think we thought, in talking about the SAVE Act, that we felt like it was important to go back into the language and include some additional language about what it is that election administrators and driver's license agencies need to do on their part to obtain proof of citizenship and to exchange data, because the Social Security Administration has all of that information about who is and isn't a citizen. Now, it may need to be updated if they didn't update it with the Social Security Administration. So let's say someone's here legally and they become a citizen, and become a naturalized citizen. The Social Security database may not be up to date. But the point is, the Department of Homeland Security, the Social Security Administration, they have data. The driver's license agencies have data. So we think that the SAVE Act needs to be basically strengthened in terms of what these agencies need to do. They need to step up, and they need to share their data with the Department of Homeland Security, because there are 10 states, you can guess which ones, who refuse to share their driver's data with the Department of Homeland Security because they don't want it used to enforce the immigration laws. And so that is, you can guess which states it is. And so we need to require that every state submit, every state needs to be sending its driver's data to DHS so the database is complete, as complete as we can get it. We need to codify that the Social Security Administration and DHS are sharing their data so that DHS will have access to the Social Security Administration's citizenship database. And we also need to require every state to submit its voter rolls, its current voter rolls, to the Department of Homeland Security to see who on the voter rolls, as of today, who on the voter rolls is not a citizen. That is a very important step. And that's not in the SAVE Act as it was passed by the House. And we want that added for purposes before, if we can ever get the Senate to take it up, we need to add that, because we need to make sure that we're looking at it not just from the applicant to register's perspective. What are these agencies doing and not doing to ensure that the people who are already on our voter rolls are all citizens? And we know today that's not the case.
Okay, so I want to come to that and unpack it. Before I go to that part, let me take a step back about the real ID. One of the things that some, not people in Washington, D.C., but some of the state and local officials will say, well, we don't really need the SAVE Act because people have a real ID. Well, but that you can get a real ID whether you're a citizen or not. And your driver's license does not necessarily indicate whether you are a citizen or not. So while you do have to show proof of citizenship or proof of being here legally, it doesn't translate onto what is actually on that real ID. So a person working the polls, if you go in and you show your real ID when you go to vote, which is not a requirement, and we're not saying that they must show a real ID to vote, but if you did that, it still wouldn't prove whether the person is a citizen or not, correct?
That's absolutely right, Jenny Beth. And one of the things that we've learned in the last year as we've been working on this issue is that these states that issue ID cards or driver's licenses to illegals, like I said, 19 states issued driver's licenses to people who are not here in the United States legally. And there is nothing on that driver's license to indicate that that person is not a citizen. There's nothing that is, and we've had legislators in hearings across the country over the last year who've had the people coming in from the driver's license agency, the head person, and they make them show what does a citizen driver's license look like? And what is a person who's here illegally, what does that look like? They look exactly the same. And sometimes that, like in Tennessee, it has, it'll have an expiration date and it'll say temporary, but that only shows that you're not here legally. But it doesn't, there's nothing on the ID, the driver's license, the real ID that says citizen. We think the law should be changed to require that it should have to say citizen. And that should be on the whatever you're going to use as a voter ID, that it needs to say citizen, and it needs to be clearly discernible.
So that would be. I'm sorry. I think we did a poll question on that. So I'm looking down. Yeah, we did. Recently, we did a poll question sort of about that. And we said the Department of Homeland Security added a simple star to identification cards and driver's licenses to indicate that a document is a real ID. Would you support or oppose the federal government requiring an addition of a simple identifier on real IDs to indicate whether the individual is a U.S. citizen or not? And that one got 65% of support. I think that that didn't get 80 or 85%, and maybe there's a way to word it differently. And I also think people just think it's a pain to get the real ID. So maybe that's part of why they said that. But still, no matter what, it's still a super majority of Americans. It's not 51%. It's not a plurality. It is a majority of Americans.
More than 2/3.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. Exactly. So even with that, we have strong support. And I think that's important regardless of elections, having that identification, this person is a citizen, this person is not, would be helpful in other situations as well. So that is something that we pulled on as well. I thought it was important to kind of hit that point about the real ID, because we do get some of that pushback at the local level. And it's just people who don't quite understand what the real ID says or doesn't say.
I can tell you, Jenny Beth, until I started working on this, I thought that you only could get a real ID if you were a citizen. I was surprised to learn last year that oh gosh, non-citizens can get real IDs. You have to be here legally. You have to have a green card and you have to show those documents. But I was very surprised. I was one of those who was not informed that real ID does not denote citizen of the United States.
Yeah, well, and I think that I knew it, but I had recently gone through the process of updating my driver's license. So it's just a matter of how recently you've done it and how closely you're paying attention to the documentation on that real ID.
Right.
Okay, now with these databases that you were talking about and the desire and to change the SAVE Act and add a few other things saying that states must provide the voter roll information to the Department of Homeland Security. Elaborate on that just a little bit. And also, hasn't President Trump and his administration done something to open up databases more for the Secretary of State to access more federal data to help figure out who are citizens and who are not on the rolls?
Yes, and that is really, I'm glad you brought that up, because this is something that the president has done, and Secretary Noem working on this. There is a system that is used in the Department of Homeland Security that's called the SAVE system, but it's a systematic alien verification for eligibility. And what that's supposed to do, what it was set up to do, was to be for an alien to be able to look up. They are issued an alien number. This is for people who come here legally. They're issued an alien number, and it was set up for them to be able to go and input their number and their name, and it would tell the date they came to the United States and when they were eligible for welfare benefits. Because Congress did say you were not supposed to be able to get benefits until you had been in the United States Originally, it was 5 years. They reduced it to 2. And of course, we know the Biden administration just disregarded it altogether. But that's what the SAVE system was originally set up to do. Well, the problem with comparing voter rolls to that system is that it was created to be a one person, one search at a time. And so what they have done since February of this year is they have taken that system and they have converted it to be able to do batch uploads. So when you have millions of people on a registration list, you're not going to be able to get very far if you're having to do it one at a time. Plus, those voter registration people on the voter registration list don't have an alien number. And so they had to reconfigure the capabilities of the system to be able for a state to submit, or a county. We want them to be able also for counties, because sometimes the Secretary of State or the chief election official is someone who doesn't care about election integrity and doesn't care if there are non-citizens on the rolls. So they're not going to submit the statewide list, but there may be county election offices who are willing to have their list checked against the citizenship data that the Department of Homeland Security has. So they're converting the system to one where it can rapidly upload data files in batches. So it doesn't have to be one at a time. Another thing they've done is they've entered into a data sharing agreement with the Social Security Administration. So the Social Security Administration data can be incorporated into the search and the confirmation process, and using their information from about citizenship status. And again, Social Security numbers are issued to non-citizens and were issued in great numbers the last 4 years to people here illegally. But that is reflected in the Social Security Administration database, or it's supposed to be. So, and then they're doing it free of charge for the states, at least for the time being. It used to be a very expensive process for states to enter into agreements with DHS. Then they had the problem of the one record at a time. And they didn't have access to the Social Security Administration data. So all of those things have been happening. We think that should be codified so that every state would have to submit its voter rolls to the Department of Homeland Security to confirm citizenship. And there'd be a process if for everyone whose citizenship can't be confirmed, who's on the voter rolls, then there needs to be a process for notifying that person to say, is this correct? If you are a citizen, maybe you've been naturalized and nobody knew that wasn't updated in your Social Security database. Give people an opportunity to bring their documentation to show, yeah, I really am a citizen. And other than that, if they can't do that, then they would be removed from the voter rolls. But we need to codify what is happening in the Trump administration, because we've seen all too clearly what happens when another administration comes in and they don't like the idea that only citizens should be voting. So good things are happening, and I'm pretty amazed at how quickly the Department of Homeland Security has been able to move to adapt the SAVE system to be able to verify citizenship for states. And they're learning as they go what other things they need to do. And they're doing those things. But I think we need to codify it so that it can't be taken away. And then you have the situation, as I mentioned earlier, where there are those 10 states that refuse to share their driver's data with DHS. You also have all these secretaries of state in some big blue states saying, we refuse to have our voter rolls run through the system because we don't care. We don't want to find out if there are non-citizens on our voter rolls. California is one. Minnesota is one. So I think that they should be mandated. Congress should say, no, you don't have this is not optional. We're going to enforce the law. And this is how we do it. So So that's something that we think should be added to the SAVE Act.
Yeah, and it's pretty. These are common sense things that should be codified so they can't be changed back to the dysfunction that we had before. And it's very important for voter rolls. So, and that's what we're talking about. But it really goes even beyond it goes beyond voter rolls. A lot of the work that the Doge team has done, going in and figuring out how to make one computer system talk to another computer system and add columns to databases so that they can communicate with one another. As a former computer programmer, I can't believe that it took until 2025 to get a lot of these changes made. So they need to be corrected, and then we need to safeguard the changes that have happened administratively and from the executive branch level to ensure that they stay corrected and that they don't go back to the dysfunction we had before.
Absolutely. And one of the things that federal law requires that under HAVA, the Help America Vote Act that was passed in 2002, it requires states and state election offices to verify identity and residency of every applicant to register to vote. But it doesn't require verifying citizenship. And there is a separate system that is set up within the Social Security Administration that was set up in response to the Help America Vote Act. And it's called the HAV, H-A-V-V, the Help America Vote Verification System. And so the Social Security Administration has already been responsible for more than 20 years to work with the states on verifying identity of the person, and if the person is alive or dead, and residency. But the problem is that they have not been adding that extra column to say whether or not they're a citizen. And we learned from Doge that the Social Security database was very flawed and had how many millions of people over the age of 100, 120, receiving Social Security checks. So, I haven't really heard an update since then, but, we've always looked to the Social Security Administration and their data as the gold standard. Well, if they're so screwed up and they're not the gold standard, where is the gold standard? So I sure hope that what they have uncovered and has been remedied, that they've corrected the problems of the database at the Social Security Administration, because we have to have that. So that's why we have to have multiple sources of citizenship confirmation. We have to just be very vigilant about that. And I think it's time that we mandate that we have various agencies responsible so that we have it checked once and twice and three times. And the applicant, the voter himself or herself, should have to provide the documentation. That's the only way we're going to sort this out, because of the mess that was created by open borders.
Yeah. Well, and it is because of open borders. It's just a huge mess. And then we have dysfunctional systems within the government as well. Right. So it just creates the perfect opportunity for mistakes to happen, for deliberate cheating to happen, but also just for mistakes to happen. If you don't speak English very well and you're going in to get a driver's license and you see a form and you start filling it out and checking the boxes because you think you're supposed to check the box, well, you could inadvertently register without even realizing that that's what you're doing, that you could inadvertently register to vote without even realizing that's what you're doing. It doesn't mean that they necessarily set out to break the law and to register to vote. It happens. We all fill out forms wrong from time to time. And that's part of why this is so important, is to put guardrails in place to help prevent that from happening and to correct it if mistakes happen.
That's right. We have to have multiple checks and cross checks. So if what we had was a system, the system that would be ideal is that citizenship would be confirmed and identity and residency, so that you wouldn't have people registering at a PO box when the law requires you to provide your primary residential address. And if citizenship were confirmed before adding somebody to the voter rolls, and confirm it by the data at the DMV, the data at the Department of Homeland Security, and the Department of Homeland Security is getting more data than it used to get. Now it gets Social Security data. And then to have a person who has to provide their documentary proof of citizenship at the time of registration. And then we know that hasn't been happening. So we know that there are millions of non-citizens on the rolls. So to require the states to have to provide their voter rolls so that they can be run against the citizenship data and identify who are the non-citizens who are on the voter rolls, and then notify them, give them the opportunity to show their documentation that says, yes, I am a citizen. And if they can't do that, they need to get off the rolls. They need to be off the rolls. And here's why this matters so much, Jenny Beth. You have states like California and Nevada that mail a ballot, a full ballot, to every person whose name appears on the voter registration list. So if you have not confirmed their citizenship status, the state is basically handing the opportunity to break the law by sending them that ballot. And of course, the states that do that are the states that do not want us to do the kinds of things that you and I are talking about, because they want to have non-citizens and illegals voting. And if you're here permanently, you're a permanent resident, that doesn't mean you get to vote. You do not get to vote. But the final step is requiring a photo identification to vote. Whether you're voting by mail or whether you're voting in person, you have to show your ID, and the only IDs acceptable for voting should have citizen on the ID. So then you've got all the way along, you have confirmation before your name is added, verification of your eligibility and your citizenship. That's should be done before you're added to the registration list, and then have the registration list scrubbed periodically on a regular basis to catch anything that fell through the cracks. And then the person who wants to vote by mail or vote in person, they have to apply. They should not be getting ballots automatically sent to them. They should have to apply. And when they apply for a mail ballot, they should have to have a photocopy of their ID. And if they vote in person, they should have to present that ID, and that ID needs to say citizen. So all along the way, those are things that will tighten this process and protect us from non-citizen voting.
Yeah, and I think they're very important steps to take, and we're not going to get all of these things done before
26.
Before October of this year or before the 2026 election. But these are the kind of steps necessary to just ensure the integrity of our elections, and to ensure that American citizens are deciding who is going to represent Americans in the American Congress and American Senate. It's
common sense.
It makes sense. It does. It's common sense. Go ahead.
I was going to say that there are some other, along those same lines, there are a couple of other things and I wondered if you might be interested in talking about the census and the apportionment of Congress, of the U.S. House, to make sure that, again, that only citizens are included in the apportionment of the U.S. House of Representatives. Because right now, federal dollars are allocated based on total population. Federal House seats, and that means the Electoral College, are allocated based on total population, which provides an incentive to states like California to stuff as many illegals into their state as possible, because what happens? They get more power and more federal money. So we need to reverse those incentives. We need to make sure that only citizens are counted when they're apportioning the United States House. And that's why we have to have the citizenship question on the census. We need to do that. It used to be on the census questionnaire for the decennial census. It was taken off the questionnaire because Congress passed a law that everyone who was here in the United States, whether they were here legally or illegally, that they had to register. That's where they get their alien number and all of that. Well, that law was repealed. So they took off the "Are you a citizen?" question from the census because the non-citizens were having to register. Well, then the Congress repealed that for some unknown reason. And so now you don't, for the last two decennial census questionnaires did not have the citizenship question. We need to restore that. I think under the Constitution that the decennial census must count everybody, but that's why we need to have the citizenship question so you know of the total population who is and who is not a citizen. And we need that data, and then apportion the House, which means apportioning electoral votes based on citizens, and the districts be drawn by the states based on citizen population. Again, we've just realized, I think, in the last year what these open borders policies have resulted in terms of allowing non-citizens political power that in the states who have the most non-citizens or illegals are, they're benefiting at the expense of other states.
Cleta, explain that again one more time, what you were just saying about the law that was passed about that wound up removing the citizenship question, but the law is repealed now.
The law does, the census questionnaire is not statutory. It is something that is developed by the Department of Commerce, the Census Bureau. But historically, are you a citizen of the United States? I mean, the decennial census requires counting the total population, all the inhabitants or residents, something like that. And then but historically, there was always a question about who in your household is a citizen. How many citizens do you have in your household? And, you don't have to be 18 to be a citizen. And so that was always part of the citizenship. It was always part of the census data. At some point, there was a law passed by Congress, maybe in the 80s. I have to remember, I have to go back and find that. But it set up a system, a separate system, whereby all people who were non-citizens living in the United States would have to register with that database in whatever agency it was. And then, so then they would have this complete database of everyone who was here who was not a citizen. Well, then ultimately Congress repealed that particular requirement to try to maintain that database of non-citizens. And so that no longer exists. In the meanwhile, the Census Bureau had removed the citizenship question on the basis that it wasn't necessary to gather that data because it was already being collected throughout, every year that people were here. They had to register if they weren't citizens. Well, so that was the basis on which the census question, are you a citizen, or how many citizens are in your household? That was the justification for removing that question. And then it just never has been restored. It needs to be restored. And that's one of the things I think Congress needs to do, to mandate, so it can't be taken off again by an administration. So it can be mandated. And the Supreme Court ruled in 2020 that there was no constitutional impediment to asking that question. But the court said it was just too late because the first Trump administration did not start that process to add the citizenship question until they said too late in the process of preparing for the census.
The fact that they removed it is kind of silly when they go, oh, well, we already have all that information. Well, you also already have where people live and how many people are in the country.
Right.
So why do we even have a census? I mean, it's just, I know why we have one, and I know it's constitutionally required. So I'm not naive to that, but the thinking of, well, we don't need to know how many are actually citizens or not. That's kind of,
well, it's part of this. There is a contingent of people in the country. I think it's about 20%. They just happen to be the same 20% that didn't want term limits for members of Congress, the same 20% that don't want clean voter rolls, or that's only 10%. But we need the citizenship data. And it's interesting because the Census Bureau conducts what they call the American Community Survey, and they do that every year and gather different types of data and information. These are not actual enumerations; they're more surveys and extrapolations, but they're statistically valid. They use certain formulae to make sure they're statistically valid. But they count citizens. They can tell you in the through the American Community Surveys, the Census Bureau does release data about people who are not citizens. What is the non-citizen population? What's the citizen population? The problem is that it is statutory, that and only Congress can fix the problem of allowing the U.S. House to be apportioned by total population, and instead of making sure that only citizens are counted in the apportionment. The Census Bureau, after the census is conducted in the even numbered year every 10 years, then within 1 year, then the Census Bureau has to announce and issue an allocation of the 435 House seats in the U.S. House. And that could be increased, by the way. That can be increased or decreased. It's not, 435 is not in the Constitution. But, and so in 2021, the Census Bureau announced its apportionment of U.S. House seats. And 1 year later, after they conducted the American Community Survey post the decennial census in 2020, they publicly acknowledged that they had overcounted the population in 14 states. And all of 11 of those 14 states were blue states. And they awarded more House seats to those blue states than they deserved and they were entitled to. There were two red states, Ohio and Utah, who got extra. I think they said that they were overcounted. And Texas and Florida were two of the states that were undercounted. So all this brouhaha about the Texas redistricting that's going on of its congressional seats, the Biden administration already denied Texas House seats to which it was entitled. Same for Florida. And so that the mistake benefited the blue states that were involved and disadvantaged red states. So we have a U.S. House, as you know, so closely divided, that should not be as closely divided as it is because the apportionment was wrong.
Yeah, and trying to get that corrected, it's kind of shocking how the left is upset about what Texas is doing right now, which is different than just gerrymandering. They're doing that in response to a court case. Am I correct about that? Really? Explain that.
Well, yes, there was a court decision that had to do with the Voting Rights Act and the manner in which, the Fifth Circuit has said that you cannot create a minority district based on what they call, I think, a coalition of, the Democrats have spent hundreds of millions of dollars, probably billions, on all of this apportionment, reapportionment, the census, redistricting. They've known for a very long time how important this was. And there were 3 seats, 3 districts in the Texas map, congressional map, that the Supreme Court, that the Fifth Circuit ruled are a violation of the Voting Rights Act because it was based on some provisions of the Voting Rights Act that were invalidated. And so that was the reason why the redistricting was ordered in the first place. The Justice Department ordered Texas to redraw its maps, which is not unusual. That's also something that the Democrats have been famous for. I live in North Carolina. Geez, they seem like they're drawing maps every year here. So this is not something out of the ordinary. The difference is it's usually always the Democrats and the left-wing groups that are pushing it. And because now it's these districts were determined to be invalid under the Voting Rights Act, and and the Justice Department said you have to correct your maps and draw, because you're disadvantaging some people, some residents of the state based on race, and you can't do that. And so they had to redraw the districts because of the violations of law.
Yeah, and you have to, if the state is breaking the law, it must be corrected. It's pretty simple, but the mainstream media is not even reporting that fact. If you go and look at the New York Times or Newsweek or Washington Post, they make it seem like Texas is doing this all just to rig the system in Republicans' favor. And that's not what is happening at all. And then you have Gavin Newsom, who is... he's not an honest man. He's not an honest man at all. But if you look at the numbers for California, there are 43 Democrat representatives to Congress and 9 Republicans, yet the state votes 60% Democrat, 40% Republican. So if that were the case, there should probably, if you're trying to make it representative or reflective of the way people vote in the state, you wouldn't have just 9 Republican seats. You would have probably about 20. And then in some of the seats the states in the Northeast, like not Boston, but Massachusetts, they don't have a single Republican seat at all. So they sit there and they're all upset about this, like what you were just saying. They do this all the time to gerrymander in favor of their party. And Texas is responding to an order from a court, and they're making it seem like the sky is falling. It's just so dishonest.
And they dishonest. They do not talk about the fact that California, if only citizens had been counted for apportionment of the U.S. House in 2010 and 2020, California would have lost 7 House seats. In addition to the House seats they've lost because of people are moving out. Yeah. And so they need the illegals in order to retain their power. And then when you have the Census Bureau apportioning the House and they made a mistake, oops, and California gets 2 House seats that it shouldn't have if it had been done correctly, and the Census Bureau has acknowledged that. The system has benefited California. The mistake has benefited California. I don't hear Governor Newsom saying, well, gee, you're right, we should give those 2 seats to Texas. No, they haven't done that.
He's not doing that at all, and he's just doubling down on his dishonesty.
Well, the other thing is, they're talking about, they don't even explain what it is. It's very interesting. I've been reading these articles in Politico, and today's announcement about he's starting the process of pushing for redistricting in California. What he's trying to do is get a constitutional amendment to amend the California Constitution, which now prohibits mid-decade redistricting. That's what he's trying to do. But in no article that I have read about this in any of the left-wing outlets, as you say, New York Times, Washington Post, USA Today, Politico, none of them explain what this referendum is all about. It's to amend the Constitution of the state to allow for mid-decade redistricting. And it also, here's the other thing, Jenny Beth, and you and I've talked about this many times. It's why I work on the election process. All of these are election process issues. California has adopted an election process that makes it virtually impossible for a Republican to win. What they've eliminated the party primaries, so the Republicans don't get to pick their nominee and the Democrats pick their nominee and then they run against each other in November. No, they've eliminated the primaries so that the top two vote getters are the nominees in the fall. So you have place after place after place where you only have two Democrats on the ballot when the voters go to vote in the fall in the general election. They have allowed for ballots to come in for weeks after Election Day. And so they just keep counting until their guy wins. And they don't clean their voter rolls. Judicial Watch sued Los Angeles County, and about 2 years ago got an order, an admission from the election officials in Los Angeles County that they had not conducted any list maintenance since Janet Reno was the Attorney General. So the NVRA was passed when Bill Clinton was president. It requires that the states make and the officials, the election offices, make a reasonable effort. And the courts have set that bar pretty low. I mean, to make a reasonable effort to maintain accurate voter lists. And Los Angeles County admitted that it had not done one list maintenance effort since 1993 when the law was passed. And that was just 2 years ago. So, and then they're sending ballots to everybody on the list. So you got these live ballots that are just floating around that are not going to people who are alive. So pardon me if I don't find Gavin Newsom's proclamations and hysteria very compelling. I just think he is a total liar. And he gets away with it because the media is so dishonest. They're just so dishonest.
Well, it benefits them to be dishonest because they're partisan hacks.
Yes, they are.
But and there's one thing that Attorney General Bondi and President Trump have been working on, and that is getting the information about the voter rolls from different states around the country. And they want to know which non-citizens have been removed from the voter rolls, I believe. And of course, the states are dragging their feet and they don't want to provide this. The Democrat states, like in California, and they're saying it'll be very complicated. I don't know why it's so complicated. If you know that you remove non-citizens from the voter roll, you should be able to quickly go through and run a query in your database to figure out who the people were who you did that with.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're asking what procedures, what process are you using? Yeah. What are you doing for list maintenance? And Harmeet Dillon is the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, for the Civil Rights Division. And it's her department, her division that has sent those letters to the states. And some of the states, like Maryland's response was, well, here's where you can go find this and look it up yourself. And so there is a separate statute under the Civil Rights Act that requires states to provide to the Department of Justice information and data upon request if it impacts the ability of the right to vote. And so in addition to the NVRA, there's another federal statute in the Civil Rights Act that requires them to answer the questions. So I promise you, they're going to get the answers, and I don't think it's going to be very pretty. And I think that's why some of these blue states don't want to answer, because their answer is, well, we haven't done anything.
Well, that's right. That is exactly right. And they haven't done anything at all. So somehow these states have perfect voter rolls and they never even need any cleaning or any list maintenance at all, which is absurd. That's absolutely absurd. Yeah,
it's illegal.
It is. And it's illegal because, as you just said, HAVA, right?
Well,
Requires that you.
both HAVA and the NVRA require list maintenance. They require the states to have a computerized list of all the voters eligible to vote in a federal election, a statewide list. And it might surprise you that 30 years later, that Hawaii had not complied with that requirement of the law. And and then they're supposed to, so that's both in the NVRA and HAVA. They're supposed to have a computerized list, and they're supposed to keep it maintained. And they're also supposed to maintain the records of what they've done on list maintenance. That's also in the law. And these states aren't doing that either. This should be pretty simple. Here are our list maintenance records. This is our process. This is what we do. And you have these states that, in that case, interestingly enough, during the Biden administration, the Public Interest Legal Foundation sued the state of Maine because it refused to turn over the records on list maintenance. That went up to the First Circuit, and both the trial court and the First Circuit upheld the requirement. And interestingly, the Department of Justice, the Biden Department of Justice, actually weighed in support of upholding the federal statute, which was shocking, but they did.
We should not be shocked by what the courts do, I suppose.
Yeah.
Every once in a while,
well,
they get
it's
it right
always shocking when a court it agrees with our side on election integrity issues.
Yeah, it's very true. That's very true. Okay, now one last thing. There are going to be people who are very involved in the election integrity movement, and they are our allies and are in this quest to improve the trust in the outcome of our elections, who may be saying, well, why are you only working on only citizens vote, and why aren't you doing more? But this is just one small thing that we're trying to accomplish because the bill is already written. It's already been through the House of Representatives twice. And it does not mean at all that there's not a lot of other work, like you just were talking about, what we need to have done with the census. We need to work to modify what the SAVE Act currently has so that those changes to the database can be corrected as well. And there are other things that you and the Election Integrity Network are trying to get done at both the federal and the state level. So it's not like we're saying this is all we're trying to do. This is just one small component.
Well, yes, Jenny Beth, thank you for that. We worked toward the end of last year. I realized we had volunteers all over the country working on issues of the election process in their states. And people always say, well, aren't elections really the province of the states? And I would say, yes, except that there are 5 federal statutes that really govern how our elections are conducted. And we need to fix those statutes. The most recent of them was the Help America Vote Act, and that was enacted in 2002. So there are a lot of things we need to do at the federal level, but at the state level, there are lots of issues with the election codes. So last winter after the election, we started a process of gathering, okay, you spent 4 years working on this. Now, what are the problems that need to be fixed? And then, so I received, hundreds of responses. And then we tried to distill those and ultimately distill those into 10 principles of what we're calling the U.S. Citizens Elections Bill of Rights. It's 10 principles. The first one is that only citizens should participate in our body politic, and that is registering, voting, being counted for apportionment, districts drawn based on citizen federal money. And there's another component of that, which is the only citizens participation, which is no foreign money in any election. It's already against the law for a non-citizen to give money to a candidate or political party or to make expenditures. We need to extend that to apply also to ballot measures, because that is not something that is in the current law. It needs to be added. So that principle, only citizens participate in our body politic, has different components. And so then we have 9 other principles. such as for purposes restore election day, so that we don't, do not accept ballots that come in after the close of the polls on election day, that they can't be counted if they come in after the close of the polls. And we need to make sure that that we address the issues of election administration and require that states follow. The Help America Vote Act is codified in the federal statute as election administration improvement. Election administration improvement. Well, except that the Help America Vote Act actually hamstrings local officials from actually improving their election administration. We want to strengthen those provisions. We want states to, the expansion over the last 20 years to vote centers instead of precinct voting makes it impossible to reconcile and ensure the accuracy of the election results. I mean, remember, ultimately what we want are accurate election results. We don't want inaccurate results.
You don't want three different results for one election? Like in Georgia in 2020?
Exactly. They could not come up with the same numbers twice. Not even twice. And some counties, remember, some of those counties said, we don't know how we got this first one. We don't know how we got the second one. And the state said, well, just send in what you have and we'll pick. We'll decide. I mean, it was insane. But so that's a principle of none of these cockamamie ideas like ranked choice voting and getting rid of the Electoral College. I mean, these are things we have to battle. But if people are interested in seeing the U.S. Citizens Elections Bill of Rights, you can go to the website of the Election Integrity Network, and that's the website, www.electionintegritynetwork.org. And just go and look at the Elections Bill of Rights, the U.S. Citizens Elections Bill of Rights, 10 principles for reclaiming our elections. And we've talked mainly here about the first principle, which we do think is the first principle, which is that only citizens should be participating, only citizens should be counted, only citizens should be voting. But each of the principles has components, and all of them I think are very important. This is a system. The elections are a system, and we need to fix a lot of the problems in the system. We need to deal with the problem of there's a federal statute that states have adopted and implemented, and it's just a mess. It's supposed to have helped overseas deployed military. And instead, every year since the upgrade to the Uniformed Overseas Citizens Absentee Voting Act, or we call it UOCAVA, ever since that was enacted, the percentage of the UOCAVA vote that is coming from active duty military has gone down to the point that it's less than a third. Now, the military component of UOCAVA is now less than a third of the total UOCAVA vote. And we've seen it being manipulated because you don't have to prove you're a citizen of the United States to be able to get a ballot and send in a ballot and state. You don't even have to prove that you live overseas. So there are some things that can be done administratively by the administration to enforce the existing law. But there are changes that need to be made in the statute to strengthen the military component and to make sure that people are not gaming the system if you're not in the military. The civilian component of this is very vulnerable to fraud.
Yeah, and all of it, there's so much work to be done to improve the processes and to codify a lot of the changes as well. That's
right. And then to give standing and private right of actions to citizens to be able to enforce some of these things. The Attorney General of the United States has enforcement authority over all of the federal statutes that govern our elections. But with the Trump administration and Pam Bondi and Harmeet Dillon, we now have an administration that's really interested in enforcing the federal laws. But we need to make sure that if we have an administration that isn't interested in enforcing the law, that there's a private right of action. And right now, the only private right of action is under the National Voter Registration Act, the NVRA, but we need to add to that.
Well, and it's good to know that you and the Election Integrity Network and volunteers around the entire country are working on all these other aspects. And you guys have many different working groups working on each of these different issues.
We do. And all of that information can be found at the website. People can sign up. They can become part of a working group. We love having new people and people who want to volunteer and learn more. Because ultimately, Jenny Beth, and you really have been such a leader in this for so long. You're the national leader on this very topic, which is that citizens have to be involved. They have to oversee what their government is doing. And if we're not involved, then it leaves the field just to the bureaucrats and people who don't much like having us involved, but we don't care. And it's just like parents realized that they need to go to the school board meetings. They need to be involved and engaged with their children's schools. They need to know what books are in the library. This is all parcel of the same thing. The election system is built upon the notion that there will be citizen engagement as observers and as members of electoral boards. And we have been fighting with the Mark Elias left-wing Democrat constellation of groups for 4.5 years now, because they do not like the idea of having people, just normal citizens, involved. They liked having the field to themselves, and it's time that we did something about that.
Well, and you are doing amazing work on it. Cleta, thank you so much for joining us today. If they want information for the Election Integrity Network, that website is
www.electionintegritynetwork.org. And we'd love to have people involved.
Very good. And then if you want more information about Only Citizens Voting, you can go to demandonlycitizensvote.com. Cleta Mitchell, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Jenny Beth.
The Jenny Beth Show is hosted by Jenny Beth Martin, produced by Kevin Mooneyhan, and directed by Luke Livingston. The Jenny Beth Show is a production of Tea Party Patriots Action. For more information, visit teapartypatriots.org.
If you like this episode, let me know by hitting the like button or leaving a comment or a 5-star review. And if you want to be the first to know every time we drop a new episode, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for whichever platform you're listening on. If you do these simple things, it will help the podcast grow, and I'd really appreciate it. Thank you so much.